Hey, good morning. How are you guys? Got a full house today. So happy to see y'all. Hope you're doing well. As Luke said, we are in part 2 of the series we started last week called Redeeming Love, and it's based on the book of Ruth. We're going to be in Ruth chapter 2 this morning if you want to go ahead and get turned there. While you're doing that, let me ask you a question. Have you noticed all of the things that you wouldn't think would be impacted by Corona that have? I mean, every day we see news about different things that have increased or decreased or changed. This week I was looking at an article that talked about the increase in the use of dating sites. Because of Corona, which when I thought about it, I thought, okay, well, that makes sense. You know, people can't really go out and socialize and everything, so dating apps are on the rise. But, you know, there's Match.com, and there's Tinder, and there's Hinge, and, you know, there's probably lots of other ones. My favorite is Farmers Only. Okay, I don't understand that one. I think they missed a really great marketing opportunity on the name. I think they should have called it Attractor. You'll get it later, okay? So anyway, what we're going to look at today, the reason why I thought about that was today in Ruth 2, we're going to be looking at what happens with Ruth and Naomi. You know, we were introduced to them last week, and we're going to see a lot of kind of agricultural stuff happening today. I think that's why I started thinking about Farmers Only. Anyway, so let's jump in here. So Ruth chapter 2, verse 1. Now Naomi had a relative of her husband's, a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. Now, we can't really relate to clans today unless you're a fan of Braveheart, because clans are kind of a big part of that movie. But clans were an important part of kind of the society structure back in this day, and especially in the ancient Near East. And the basic breakdown, to help us understand, was you were an individual who was part of a family, that was part of a clan, that was part of a tribe, that was part of a nation. So a clan was kind of situated right there in the middle. And a clan was basically this kind of loose assimilation of people that had some kind of family tie. So you may have been like third cousins or something like that, but somehow, somewhere along the way, you were related. And that's kind of how you formed your clan. And so what we're going to see today is the importance of that little word, clan, there, and how that plays into the story of Ruth. Now, in that verse there, it says that Boaz was a man worthy of the clan of Elimelech. So it doesn't mean that he was worthy to be in the clan of Elimelech. It means he was a worthy man. And, oh, by the way, he was in the clan of Elimelech. So it's a statement of his character. And we know that because that word that we have as worthy in our version of the Bible, it could mean wealthy as well, which we're going to find out later he was. But it really is the same word back in Judges when it talks about Gideon and his character. That same word is used. And so when we look back, we can say, okay, this really is about the character of the man. Verse 2. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after him in whose sight I shall find favor." And she said to her, "Go, my daughter." Now, gleaning's another kind of weird word, but gleaning just meant, think about the game pickup sticks, right? You scatter the sticks all over the place and you kind of pick them up, and you invariably couldn't grab them all at the same time. So there'd be some sticks left over. That's really what gleaning is. In the wheat fields or in the barley fields, they would cut the wheat or the grain or the barley, and then they would bundle it up together, and then someone would come by and pick up the bundles. Well, in bundling it all up, invariably, there would be little pieces or little sticks or little stalks that they missed that were laying around. And so gleaning meant that you would go in and you'd pick up the leftovers, right? So there'd be a stalk here, a grain head there, and so you were going to go in there and clean it up. Listen, there was no food bank or no Salvation Army in ancient Israel. If you were poor, this was how you survived. If you needed food, you would go out and glean in the fields. And if it wasn't harvest time, I'm not sure what you would do. But God made a specific provision for the poor and for widows and for orphans and for foreigners in the nation of Israel. In Leviticus 23:22, here's what it says. "When you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap to the very edges of your field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Leave them for the poor and for the foreigner residing among you. I am the Lord your God." So when they harvested their crops, they were not to go along the fence lines there. They weren't supposed to, glean or harvest in the corners. They were kind of supposed to leave those weird little areas there for the poor people. That was a provision that God made. He wanted the nation of Israel to stand out among all of the pagan nations, where in the pagan nations it was every man for himself. If you were poor, too bad, so sad. But in the nation of Israel, there were provisions made where you could, you'd have a chance of maybe surviving and of getting some food there. So that may be one of the reasons why last week, we saw Ruth and Naomi leave Moab and come back to Israel. That may have been one of the reasons. Naomi was an Israelite, and so she may have remembered, that if we go back to Israel, we can glean. We'll have a chance there. And just again, as a reminder, Moab is now modern Jordan, and I'm going to come back to that a little bit later. So Ruth sets out, right, to find and collect grain in a field. And she knows that she's going to be at the mercy of whatever farmer or landowner she comes across. That's why she's saying, man, I hope I find favor in somebody's sight. I hope they'll let me do this. And really, I hope I'll be protected, right? Because remember, she's a young woman. She's a foreigner. She has no clan. She has no people, right? She has no one really to protect her. So she is in a precarious position. She's in a dangerous situation to go out in the fields by herself. And she was Ruth the Moabite. And it was pretty obvious that she was a Moabite because, I don't know where your head goes, but today you might think of all the people from the Middle East kind of looking all the same, right? And even today, they don't. When we were in Jordan a couple of years ago, there was every skin tone. People looked, like they were European to, kind of what you would picture with, brown skin and dark eyes and everything. But back then, people really did look different from tribe to tribe. And so you could kind of tell, right? So I think most of you know, but in case you don't and you're wondering, my mom is Korean, so that makes me half Korean. But, my mom lived in Korea for about the first 18 to 20 years of her life. And then my dad married her, and they came to the United States. And so she's lived here, honestly, I have no idea how old my mom is, but she's lived here a long time, okay? So... But she's always had a lot of Korean girlfriends that she would talk on the phone with to keep her. The language is actually Hangul. There's no such thing as Korean. Okay, so that's what Koreans speak is Hangul. So she would speak with her Korean girlfriends and keep that up to date. And it kind of impacted her English. Honestly, her English is okay. But I'm sure her Hangul is probably pretty good from talking to all her girlfriends. Well, several years ago, it's probably like 10 or 15 years ago, she and my stepdad moved back to Korea for 2 or 3 years. My stepdad was a civil servant at the time, and he needed to finish out his time so he could retire. And so my mom was in their apartment. She was waiting for the cable guy or the telephone guy or somebody like that to come and hook something up in their apartment. And so she's telling him, where does it go and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, at the end of him doing his thing, he said, hey, you speak pretty good Korean for someone that's not from here. And my mom went ballistic. She's like, hey, I am Korean. But the point is this, okay? When people aren't from your place, right? You can tell. You can tell just by their, and for us today it would be by their English, okay? That's probably your second language. But so people would know in Israel, we're assuming that Ruth probably could speak Hebrew or whatever the dialect was they were speaking at the time, but they probably knew, it's probably not your first language. So Naomi tells Ruth, go get us some food. That'd be great. Verse 3. So she set out and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers. And she happened to come to a part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the clan of Elimelech. Now, she happened to come to the field belonging to Boaz. What a coincidence, right? Out of all the fields, she just happened to show up in Boaz's field. So convenient. Now, you may be sitting here today and maybe you're not a follower of Jesus. Maybe you're not fully convinced yet. Like Luke said, maybe you have questions about some things. And this may be one of those things that causes you to question, right? Out of all the fields in Bethlehem, she shows up in the one where she has a distant relative that owns it. That's too neat, too tidy, right? And you'd be right in thinking that. It is too neat and tidy. Unless, right, that nothing happens by accident in God's economy. In the life of a believer, there are no coincidences. God has a plan and a purpose for all of us. He has a purpose, a plan, and a path for every one of his children. And our steps are ordered by him, right? Look, a coincidence in the life of a believer is just confirmation of God's sovereignty. There are no coincidences. It's just a confirmation that God is sovereign and he has a purpose and a plan and a path for your life. Verse 4, and behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem, and he said to the reapers, the Lord be with you. And they answered, the Lord bless you. I think we should use that word more often. Behold, right? That'd be awesome. If you want to introduce people, behold, here comes Sheila. It just adds a little extra punch to our conversation. Anyway, how many of you are fans of Hallmark movies? Anyone? You can be honest. I am. I think they're pretty good. Look, it's like going to McDonald's. You know it's not going to be great, but it's always consistent. You know what you're going to get, okay? So don't be ashamed. I like McDonald's too. I know it's not good for you, but it's still pretty tasty sometimes, right? But all of those Hallmark movies kind of follow the same formula, right? There's a girl. She's totally wrapped up in her job. It's everything to her. She's dating some guy that's totally wrong for her, and then he jilts her. So then she moves to some small town out in the middle of nowhere, okay? And then she meets this guy who's Mr. Right, but it doesn't work out at first. And so there's this little dance they're doing through the whole rest of the movie. But then eventually they get together and it all works out. I mean, that is every Hallmark movie summed up right there. When the writer of Ruth says, behold, Boaz, this is the start of a Hallmark movie. He's saying, here comes Mr. Right. And that's Boaz. He's Mr. Right for Ruth. You know, that word behold really is typically used to introduce a person, an idea, or a concept. And in this case, it is behold, here is Boaz, right? In our vernacular today, it'd be ta-da, here's Boaz. So this is kind of a turning point in the story already. So here comes Boaz, Mr. Right. He's going to take care of Ruth. And I'm not giving the story away because I think most of you know where this is going or you've read it before, right? So, but that exchange between Boaz and his workers also gives us insight into Boaz's character, right? When he says, the Lord be with you, that gives us an indication that Boaz wasn't a guy who went to the temple on Saturday and worshiped God and then lived his life the way he wanted to the rest of the week. His faith has permeated every aspect of his life, right? There's no secular and sacred for Boaz. It's all sacred. So his work life, it's God's, which is why he greets his workers that way. And then the way his workers respond to him is just as important, and it's just as important of a testimony of his character. The Lord bless you, right? If Boaz wasn't a good boss, if he didn't treat his workers well, when he said, hey, the Lord be with you, it could have been, yeah, right, whatever, Boaz. But they wish a blessing upon him as well. So we're getting a sense of the character of the man, of Boaz. He is a good man in everyone's eyes. Verse 5. Then Boaz said to his young man who was in charge of the reapers, whose young woman is this? Now, notice Boaz didn't say, who is this? He said, whose is she? Whose young woman is this? And this goes back to that whole clan thing. What Boaz is asking is, hey, what is her clan? Who is her family? What's the bigger group that she's part of? Because that was so important in the ancient Near East, right? He's really asking this question. Who's responsible for her? Why is she out here doing this? And that really is the question. That sets the major tone for the rest of this chapter and for the next chapter too. Who is responsible for Ruth? Whose is she? Boaz's foreman tells him, she's a young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. She said, please let me glean and gather among the sheaves after the reapers. And so she came, and she's continued from early morning until now, except for a short rest. Now, poor Ruth, nobody's going to let her forget that she's a Moabite, right? Look at the foreman. He says, yeah, she's that Moabite woman from Moab, that's where she's from. And so everyone knows she is not from Israel. She's a foreigner. She's an outsider. She's on the outside looking in. And because of that, this interchange right here could have gone really different. It could have gotten very, very dark because, again, she's a young woman. She doesn't have the protection of a family or a clan. There's no husband. There's no father. There's no father-in-law. There's no male figure that can look after her. She is a Moabite, right? So technically, she is an enemy of the nation of Israel. So really, nobody should really care what happens to her, right? But because Boaz is a man of character, here's what he says. He comes to Ruth and he says, "Now listen, my daughter, do not go to glean another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women. Let your eyes be on the field that they are reaping and go after them. Have I not charged the young men not to touch you? And when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink what the young men have drawn." So Boaz, again, is showing his character by saying, hey, I'm concerned for you. Don't go to any of those other fields. It's not safe for you. I've talked to and this gives you the indication, right? I've talked to my men to not touch you. That tells you where this could have gone, right? And he's saying, you just stay here, follow my women, reap where they reap, and if you need a drink, you can go get a drink over here. You just stay here, and we'll take care of you. If you're thirsty, the Boaz Company Yetis are over there. You go help yourself. And again, it seems like a minor detail, but this was a culture where women brought water to the men. Okay, the women served the men, and then they got to drink. This was a culture where foreigners did a lot of the menial labor. This is a culture where foreigners were to bring water to Israelites. But here is Boaz saying, no. You just jump in there with my guys, and you get yourself a drink from our water jars when you're thirsty. You don't have to go fetch your own water. You don't have to go find some other women to drink with. You can get a drink from my guys' water supply. Now, this is more than Ruth could have hoped for, right? She started her day saying, man, I hope I find favor with somebody when I go out to glean. I hope God's going to protect me and this will go well. Remember, she said, when I go out, I'm going to look for a field to glean in, and hopefully God's favor will come down on me and I'll have favor in the owner's eyes. So Ruth's completely blown away by what's happening because this is way more than she could have ever hoped for, I'm sure. I'm sure she was just thinking, man, if I could just go glean and not be, physically abused or verbally abused, that we'll call that success. But Boaz says, nope, I'm going to take care of you. You're good here. You just stay here. You'll be part of us. Here's her reaction. Then she fell on her face, bowing to the ground, and said to him, "Why have I found favor in your eyes, that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner?" I mean, fell on her face and bowed down, right? It's a lot of drama just for some scraps of grain and a little bit of water. But again, Ruth knows how this could have played out, right? It could have gone 180 degrees from the way it's playing out now. This is a picture of gratitude and humility, okay? It's gratitude because she's so thankful that Boaz noticed her, that Boaz came and talked to her, and that he told her, hey, I've told my guys to leave you alone, and I've told my people to take care of you. She's so thankful that he's done that. But it's also humility because she knows that she's totally undeserving of this. She knows who she is. She's Ruth the Moabite, right? They don't have to keep reminding her of that. She knows that these aren't her people and this is not her place, and that what's happening in her is way more than she deserved. Verse 11, but Boaz answered her, "All that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me, and how you left your father and mother and your native land and came to the people that you did not know before. The Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward will be given you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." Now, this is such a great passage. We're gonna circle back around and come back to this and dig into it a little bit more. But somehow Boaz knows about Ruth's story, right? Maybe he asked around, or maybe the foreman told him. We don't know. But he knows that Ruth has come back to Israel with Naomi, even though these aren't her people, that she had no obligation to do that, right? But she's trying to take care of not only of herself, but of her mother-in-law as well. And he knows that she has shown kindness to a person that was in a very vulnerable position. I mean, could Naomi have come back by herself and gone out in the fields and gleaned Sure, she could have. But she was an old woman, right? It wouldn't have been the same. Now she's got this younger woman that is going out and gathering food for them. Then Ruth says this, I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, for you have comforted me and spoken kindly to your servant, though I am not one of your servants. So Ruth, again, is responding in humility. I am the lowest of the low. Out here in your field, I'm at the bottom of the ladder. Of all these people, I'm the lowest rung. And yet, you are showing me such kindness. You're pouring out mercy on me that I don't deserve. You're showing me such favor. And you can you can feel the relief in her voice as she's so thankful that Boaz is this man of character. So Ruth goes back to work, and then the writer of Ruth tells us later in verse 14, and at mealtime, Boaz said to her, come here and eat some bread and dip your morsel in the wine. So she sat beside the reapers, and he passed to her roasted grain. And she ate until she was satisfied, and she had some left over. Now, I don't know about you, but in my mind, I picture this scene as they're all sitting out in the field, probably some shade there, but Ruth is kind of sitting over to the side by herself because she's Ruth the Moabite, right? She's got that title hanging over her head, and she knows these aren't her people. You know, maybe she's eating a peanut butter and falafel sandwich that Naomi packed for her, right? But she's over there by herself, and then Boaz is like, oh no, come on over here. You're part of us, remember? Come join us. Here, I'll give you some bread. Dip it in that wine vinegar. Now, this, every time I read this, reminds me of Carrabba's or Johnny Carino's or any of those places. You ever eat at those places where they give you the really good rustic Italian bread, and there's a little saucer with some olive oil in it, and they pour some balsamic vinegar in it and crack a little fresh pepper on there, and then you dip your bread in there. So good, right? I could just go there and not order the entree and just eat the bread and that's what I think is happening here. They're just leaning back in the shade, eating their bread, dipping it in the wine vinegar, thinking, man, God is good. This is awesome, right? This is the best meal ever. We'll continue here, verse 15. When she rose to glean, Boaz instructed his young men, saying, let her glean even among the sheaves, and do not reproach her. And also pull out some from the bundles for her, and leave it for her to glean, and do not rebuke her. Now, Boaz is the man. He's going over and above what he needed to do here. When he says, let her glean even among the sheaves, that was kind of a no-no. They were supposed to get the leftovers, right? When she's moving in the sheaves there, she's going into stuff that they probably wanted to keep. But Boaz says, don't embarrass her. She probably, maybe this is the first time she's doing this. Let her get in there and do that. And oh, by the way, as you gather up the bundles, pull a few stalks out of there and just kind of leave them behind and let her pick those up as well. So over and above, again, it's just such a picture of Boaz's character that he's going out of his way to take care of Ruth. Verse 17, so she gleaned in the field until evening. Then she beat out what she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. And she took it up and went into the city. Her mother-in-law saw what she'd gleaned. She also brought out and gave her what food she had left over from being satisfied. So Ruth had kept some of that leftover bread, right, after she dipped it in the wine vinegar and brought it home to Naomi. So she brought her the bread, but she also brought home all this wheat that she had gleaned. Let me tell you, that Ruth is a hard worker because what she did there, an ephah, is about 30 to 50 pounds of grain. She's going to make somebody a good wife. She knows how to work, right? I'm sure all those farm workers are out there were like, yeah, look at her, right? Hope she can cook, because anyway, 30 to 50 pounds of grain. Look, there's an ancient Assyrian correspondence between a governor in Assyria to various other officials, and they were trying to get a census of, hey, how much food do we have? And what we learned from that is that the average grain ration for a fighting man in Assyria was 1 pound of grain per day. Okay, so if we use that as a rule of thumb, then Ruth has gathered about 1 to 2 months worth of food for her and Naomi in one day. Let me tell you, I'm sure she worked hard, but remember, Boaz was also kind of saying, hey, leave some extra stuff there for her. Because typically, gleaning would just keep you alive. But she's gotten ahead already. She's got 1 to 2 months worth of food from 1 day's worth of work. Verse 19. And her mother-in-law said to her, "Where did you glean today? And where have you worked? Blessed be the man who took notice of you." So she told her mother-in-law with whom she had worked and said, "The man's name with whom I work today is Boaz." So Naomi sees this 30 to 50 pounds of grain, which the writer tells us Ruth carried back into the city. So not only is she a hard worker, she's strong as an ox too, because she carried all this wheat back into the city, right? She probably does CrossFit to keep such good shape. But Ruth is so excited. She sees all this food, and Ruth knows, man, we're going to make it, right? There's a chance we can survive this now because we've got couple months worth of food there. So she's just peppering her with questions. Where'd you glean? Whose field was this? Who took such good care of you? What was that man's name? And then when Ruth tells her, oh, his name was Boaz, she goes nuts. Look at verse 20. And Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, "May he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead." Naomi also said to her, "The man is a close relative of ours. He's one of our redeemers." Naomi was like, "Oh my gosh, Boaz, yes, he's one of us. He's our family. Boaz, I know him. He's a redeemer." What a coincidence, right? Just what a coincidence that she happened to stumble into his field. When Naomi says he's one of our redeemers, right, that lets us know there's more than one. She didn't say he is the redeemer. She said he's one of our redeemers, as in there's more than one. So we need to dig into the concept of redeemer a little bit more. We'll cover it some more next week, but just for today, we're going to look at really kind of three things. There's three broad areas of responsibility for a redeemer. You're not going to be able to look in the Old Testament and find kinsman redeemer. You'll see the word, but it doesn't list responsibilities. The responsibilities were really kind of put together from Leviticus, Numbers, and Exodus. There are various verses that they built this concept of a kinsman redeemer into. So the first one was this. They were to redeem the property of a poor relative. So if a relative was poor and had to sell their property because they couldn't afford to keep it, the kinsman redeemer could buy it back for that poor relative. Okay. The second thing was keep the family's name alive by marrying a related childless widow. That's what Ruth is, right? She is childless. Elimelech's family line is basically going to end with him unless something changes. And then avenge a murder. So the basic overall concept of the kinsman redeemer was keep the family name and keep the family land alive. We want to keep that land. Remember when the nation of Israel settled in the promised land, each tribe got an allotment of land, okay? Elimelech was part of the tribe of Judah, and their land was in the area around Bethlehem. And so since Naomi and Elimelech left, remember they were gone for 10 years, I'm sure somebody just took their land over. Maybe they sold it to help finance their move to Moab. And so they need a kinsman redeemer to get their land back. And they need a kinsman redeemer to continue the line of Elimelech. And I'm sure when Naomi heard, oh, Boaz was being nice to you? Boaz was taking care of you? I'm sure the wheels were starting to turn for Naomi. And we'll see more about that in the next 2 weeks here. Verse 21. And Ruth the Moabite said, "Besides, he said to me, you shall keep close to my young men until they have finished all of my harvest." And Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, "It is good, my daughter, that you go out with his young women, lest in another field you would be assaulted." So she kept close to the young women of Boaz, gleaning until the end of the barley and wheat harvest. And she lived with her mother-in-law. When Ruth tells Naomi, hey, Boaz said that I should keep working with his crew, right? I should stay with his women, follow after his harvesters, and just keep doing this until the harvest is over. Well, the harvest was about 90 days. It ran from about March through May. Last week, we learned that they arrived back in Israel at the start of the barley harvest, okay? So conceivably, she's going to get to stay with Boaz and his crew for about 90 days. And I'm sure when Naomi heard that, she was thinking, yes, that'll be great. That'll be perfect. He'll get to know you. He'll get to like you. No, I mean, you'll be safe that way. Yes, that would be good. Yes, stay with Boaz's crew. But Naomi's, the wheels are turning for her. She's scheming for Ruth. they have enough wheat now for 1 to 2 months, right? But if Ruth continues to work with Boaz's crew at the same rate she's working, they'll have over a year's worth of food. They'll have enough food for a full year and some left over that they could sell for money so they could buy other things. So things are looking up for our ladies. And we're going to leave it right there at the end of chapter 2. But like I said, I want to go back to verses 11 and 12 because I think there's such a great picture of the heart of God. So let's take a look at those again. But Boaz answered her, "All that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me, and how you left your father and mother and your native land and came to a people that you did not know before. The Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." He's basically saying, God's going to reward you for the kind of person you are. I know the good deeds that you have done. God's going to take care of you for that. But how would Boaz know that, right? How would he know the character of Ruth? I mean, he's heard the story about her, but he doesn't know anything else about her. I mean, he doesn't know what she did prior. I mean, she was from Moab, which was a pagan nation. Remember last week we talked about they worshiped this god Chemosh that involved child sacrifice. So for all we know, she was still practicing that. That for all Boaz knew, she was still practicing that. So why would he be so kind to her? I mean, the language in his statement could be read that God will repay you for your good works. And what he's thinking is that I know that by you taking care of Naomi, you basically are saving her life. So how does Boaz know the character of Ruth, right? He's not concerned with the outside of her. Evidently, the fact that she's a Moabite doesn't bother him at all, right? She's an enemy of Israel. He's not concerned with that. Because of the character of the man, he sees the character of her, right? But how can he see past those things to her true character? And the simple answer is this. He learned it from his dad. Okay? In chapter 4, we're going to see that Boaz's dad was a man named Salmon. Looks like salmon. Salmon knew a little bit about judging the character of a person. He knew a little bit about what was on the inside of a person. That you don't judge people based on what you hear about them, by what you see about them, by what you see on the outside. See, his wife, like Ruth, was a foreigner. She was a Canaanite. Again, another enemy of the people of Israel. But she also had performed a kindness and had saved lives because of her character. See, Salmon saw firsthand how God had rewarded his wife, not just based on her works, but because she, like Ruth, had found protection under the wing of God. And that's a picture of a mother hen who gathers up her chicks under her wings to protect them. Chicks are helpless, right? They're cute, they're fluffy, they're fuzzy, but they're so helpless. And so the mother hen protects them under her wings. And that's a picture we see frequently in the New Testament. In fact, Jesus said that to the Pharisees as a condemnation of them. How often I long to gather you like a mother hen gathers her chicks, but you would not. And he was condemning them because he was saying, you're dependent upon your works. You're dependent upon you. You're not willing to be humble. You're not willing to lay down self. You're only interested in the religion of works. And that's why he condemned them with that statement. So Boaz knows that like his mom, God will reward Ruth, not just for her good works, but because she has found protection under the wings of the Lord. Not because of her standing, not because she was an Israelite, but because God in his mercy was willing to do that, right? In his mercy, he was willing to place her under the protection of his arm, or of his wings. Ruth the Moabite is trusting that God alone will be her protector, just like Rahab the harlot did. See, Rahab probably taught her son Boaz all about what happened with her. She protected the spies. She saved their lives, really. And then God took her under his wing. In his mercy, God gave protection to Rahab the harlot. It's interesting, right? Ruth the Moabite, her mother-in-law would be Rahab the harlot. Both of them had names that they had to carry around with them. Boaz learned that's just a name. You see past that, just like God does. God sees the heart of the individual. And that is the message of the gospel. That's what we see in Ruth, right? That anyone, Moabite, Canaanite, American, that humbles themselves before God will find mercy and protection, just like Rahab, just like Ruth. The story of Ruth is that we have nothing to bring before God. We have nothing. And yet, in his mercy, he chooses to save us. He chooses to pour out his mercy and his grace on us. And if we approach him with humility and with gratitude, we can find shelter in his wings. Let's pray.